It's going to wait a little longer for people to file in, but can I just, how many people here are level designers? Just trying to gauge the room. Okay, most people. How many people are from Sumo Newcastle? Quite a lot, yeah. Okay. That's cool. All right. I think I'll make a start and not let people wait too long before lunch. My name's James Arthur. I'm Principal Technical Level Designer at Sumo Newcastle. And I'm here to talk to you today about Hood, Outlaws, and Legends. And the more talks that I've seen this week at SDC, the more I think it's more a talk about how we could improve our processes. But it's really a journey along our development process for this game. So what is Hood, Outlaws, and Legends? It's a PvPvE stealth action game based on the lore of Robin Hood. What that means is we've got two teams, they're fighting each other, they're fighting AI enemies, but they're competing to steal the treasure from Sheriff of Nottingham, King John, whatever. We never really mention them specifically in our lore, but from a gameplay point of view, it's a heist, right? You're stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, or not, as the case may be. And we started work on it in early 2018 and delivered during COVID in May 2021. And we were a small studio at the time. That was the building that we were in when we started. And in early 2018, we'd just been bought up. We were previously CCP Newcastle. And you can see the CCP logo on the building there. So 40 people, and at peak we had like 4 LDs, 4 GDs, and Andy Willens, our game director. So definitely a AA size production. And over the course of the development, we grew a little bit, and that's the studio that we're in right now. But we were a fairly senior studio. We felt we could punch above our weight. The idea was always for us to develop our own IP, which was relatively a new idea for Sumo at the time, and hopefully it's going to continue a lot in future. But we wanted to start from scratch, and we wanted to develop our own IP, but we didn't want to do it in a AAA way. We felt we'd been burned a lot by AAA processes, or a lot of us had, overly bureaucratic, lots of stakeholder meetings with people with their fingers in the pie, just wanting to justify their salaries, and lots of bureaucracy, and we felt the iteration was slow, and it wasn't really finding the fun. For a previous company that I worked on, I felt that like their team of 500 people, and everyone would get their own, like a very detailed, very well designed piece of paper outlining an individual jigsaw piece that they had to make. And then the last couple of months of production, everyone's just trying to hammer in these jigsaw pieces to try and make a cohesive picture. And so that approach doesn't really work. So we're trying to do something a little bit different. Just talking about the gameplay a little bit for Hood. If you haven't played it, so this was the original concept actually. So this is, the original pitch was kind of like you're stealing for the rich, trying to extract the treasure. 2 teams starting on outside the walls. They're trying to find where the treasure is first of all. They need to locate it, and to do that they need to search these spots to give them a clue to where the treasure is. Once they've found the treasure, they need to secure it, by which I mean steal it, and then extract it. They need to take it to one of several extraction zones, and the reason that there's multiple extraction zones is to give an agency of choice to the player, and potentially outfox the other team, right? That is very similar to, in principle, to what we shipped, with one big change, and Jamie Smith talked about this in his talk yesterday, which is the sheriff. During development, we changed it so that instead of searching in these different zones for the location of the treasure, you need to find the sheriff, and the sheriff has a key. The sheriff is a big Mr. X, Darth Vader kind of character that you do not want to mess with. He can kill you and crush your head. You don't want to get in trouble with him. So pickpocketing his key is a risky move. But when you've done that, you find the location of the treasure chest, and of course the key allows you to open the vault that it's in. And then you extract it by taking it to a winch and winching it over a wall. So the reason I'm telling you these two versions of the game is because I'm going to show you videos of the game at various stages. And so this is what the game looked like when we shipped. It looks really good. The artists have done a lot of heavy lifting to make it look absolutely awesome. But that's what it started like. And so today I'm going to talk to you about how we started from that and got to that. So like I said, our approach was to do something from scratch. You know, we were learning and we were trying to do things a little bit differently to how we'd previously done it in AAA studios. And we wanted a more immediate approach and a faster iteration. And the approach in general for the game was to get it in the game, to see what works, to find the fun. It wasn't a real feature if it existed on paper. It really needed to be in the game to test it, to see how it would work. And so we tried to reduce the time to iteration as much as possible. And a good example of that is the first prototype that we had. So this was just like a free asset that we found and stock Unreal, and we dropped in this character which was from Paragon. And Paragon was a game that Epic put onto a whole load of assets onto the Epic store. And this character was a ranged character. She could fire fireballs, and that was a good proxy for our archer, Robin Hood. So she was our first Robin Hood. And then we cosplayed gameplay, because we didn't really have any gameplay. We just had stock Unreal, so we ran around the map. And we pretended to play the game. We pretended to steal the treasure and pick it up and take it places and put it down. And try to extract with that. And that alone gave us some valuable feedback. So first of all, we knew it felt fun. It felt fun to run around the castle. It felt fun to try and steal the treasure. It felt fun walking in through the front gate and looking up at the battlements, and it really encouraged. It drew on some comments. You know, people wanted to go and climb those towers. They wanted to get up on the battlements. They didn't just want to stay on the floor and like steal things. So it led to some interesting ideas straight away. The problem was, you know, we didn't have a real gameplay there, and because of this, you know, super quick mesh that we found and downloaded, the outcome was predictable. There was only one real room that the treasure could be in. You couldn't really go in the walls. It wasn't really working that well. You couldn't really go up on the battlements very easily, and there's only one way out. And so a lot of the you know, core concepts of the game that was in that original pitch, you know, there's no searching for the treasure. There's no, you know, outfoxing the other team. And it's not big enough. We knew that straight away. We could see that straight away because you could see what the other team were doing at all cases. Even if we put, you know, like some blocks of cover in the map, you could reach the other side of the map so fast that it didn't really matter. You could scout around and just cover the entire area super, super fast. So we knew we needed more space anyway. So, okay, these are the problems. How did we solve them? Well, the first one is we needed a game mode. We needed multiple extraction points. We needed multiple places where the treasure could be, search locations, all that kind of stuff that was already in the original design. Not big enough, obviously. We need a bigger map, right? Which then leads to the big question, how big? So for that point of view, we looked at competitors, and Hunt Showdown was really, there aren't many competitors for like a PvPvE heist, but Hunt Showdown is the most obvious one, and it's a different kind of game, right? We always knew it was a different kind of game to what we wanted to achieve. It's very slow, it's very brutal, it's very punishing. We didn't want any of that. We wanted something that was more fun, more action-oriented, encourage more teamwork. But they shipped with one kilometer by 1 kilometer map, so pretty huge, and it took ages to cross that map. So we knew we needed a smaller map than that, and we also knew that kind of like action games ship with, you know, maybe 5 or 6 maps. So split that kilometer by kilometer map into 6, and you get 400 by 400 meters. And so that was our benchmark, and it was a quick decision, you know, really fast, made in minutes. But that's kind of how decisions get made. at the start of a project when you don't really know anything about the project. So what to build? We looked at some castles. We weren't sure exactly what style we were going for at that point. We looked at some styles, and Dover Castle caught my eye. So there were some good things I liked about it. First of all, the keep that you can see there and the surrounding wall, it was a similar kind of scale to what we'd had in that initial mesh. So it was kind of like a benchmark. You know, we knew it would kind of fit in that space, and we knew what to expect from it. But it also had this outer wall, because we knew we needed more space, but it would still fulfill that fantasy of kind of starting on the outside and breaking in and getting to the treasure, and it would provide enough space for you to go and search areas before finding the treasure. And then there's like a church up there as well, and some other buildings that could potentially be alternative locations, viable locations for the treasure to be in. Yes, so very quickly we built up a map using Unreal's toolset, sort of based around that map. By this time we'd got programmers involved, and we had a basic game loop. We had a new marketplace character as well, very cheap I think, but we did have some marketplace assets to replace that Paragon character, thank goodness. And this is Newcastle Castle, which obviously has some inspiration, us being Sumo Newcastle. Yeah, so that's how it fitted in terms of size. So it was even smaller. The playable space was even smaller than we originally anticipated. Would that be a problem? Don't know. The only way to really tell is to test it. So on that note, just a quick note about playtesting. We playtested always and often, right? So it's part of the find the fun mentality. You had to have things in game to see if it was working, if it was fun. And that meant you had to playtest often, and it like rapid, right? So right at the start, we were iterating multiple times a day, so we had multiple playtests a day. And primarily, this kind of schedule was for the designers. I think like people who weren't designers had less playtesting, and we did kind of drop off throughout production. But even like right in late production before shipping, we did have like twice a week, you know, at least once a week, where we were playtesting together. It is brutal. It's time-consuming, but it is valuable. Like it's part of the core process. There is a feeling that it's like not while you're doing a playtest, you're not doing work, and that's not it at all. Because if you don't playtest, you don't get that feedback. The build must be maintained, though. That is a load. That's especially on level designers, also on QA. Shouldn't be underestimated about how much time it takes to just keep the game playable at all times. And devs don't really play like players. You know, we were playing in a room. As you saw before, the office wasn't that big, so you know we could shout at each other, and we knew each other well. Obviously we played multiple times a day, so you know you could tell who was this faceless character on the other team, because it's like, oh, that's Lucy. She's going to assassinate me. I'm going to like hide. So, you know, we don't play like players. It's not a replacement for QA, for sure. You know, we shouldn't expect this to be like a replacement for QA, and we shouldn't expect it to be a replacement for focus tests and external testing. It's not going to tell us anything about like the couch experience, you know, what happens when you download the game. And it does feel like that. Like the feedback sessions that we got can feel quite painful at times, for sure. Okay. So this is a playtest footage from quite early on, a few months after what you saw there. So we got a new marketplace character. This is Team Purple, Team Pink, I think. And we got some ingredients, doors that only certain characters can open. I'll talk a bit more about that as well. You can crouch and stealth your way in. Here we're going to try and search for treasure in one of those search locations. Found nothing. No clue there. Doing that is, you know, it's not satisfying when you find nothing. You know, that was an initial piece of feedback we got from that. We had a map. We had, you know, you could climb a ladder, get up to high points. So this is another one of those doors In fact, it's a wall that only Took could open, so previously you saw a door that only Marianne could open. We ended up removing them from the game because players, we anticipated this kind of gameplay where players would try and buddy up with other archetypes and try and play as other archetypes so that they could get to access different areas of the map. But actually players just found it irritating. So we removed that feature from the game fairly early on. Here we're infiltrating the castle with some basic AI there. There's the treasure. It's enormous. So what I think has happened here is that the other team might have found the treasure, they might have started extracting the treasure, they got killed by guards, they've dropped it on the stairs. Now I'm carrying the treasure, that's why I've got a T above my head and why I'm like sprinting but hardly moving. That's the kind of the proxy for moving slowly. I am also making a tactical
There's an
error
orange
by
guy about
sprinting.
to shoot you.
Oh, hello, you got some down. Also making a tactical error about sprinting over open ground. Yeah, you see, I'm not very good at this game. So, when you do these playtest sessions, you get some feedback, and sometimes feedback dominates, and it's overbearing. And one of those things for us that was where the feedback was dominating everything and just drowning out all the other issues was poor balance. And you can see what I mean from this map, and if you're a level designer, it's screaming out at you straight away. So you've got team purple and team orange, and the treasure could be in the keep or the chapel, and it's fine if it's in the keep, because the keep's in the middle, and the distance from that spawn location and that spawn location is roughly equidistant, and then you can get out with it fairly easily. To these 2 points at least, there's also a chance of being intercepted with the treasure on your way out, and that's great. But obviously it's not great when it spawns in the chapel. And if there's a 50-50 chance of that happening, then the orange team has a 50% advantage. I think that's how the math works out. Probably doesn't actually. The statistics is weird. So obviously that's a problem, and it's LD 101, of course. Balance on a multiplayer map. But it does lead to the question about how do you have a random position for the chest in a map and still make it balanced on every permutation of things. So this was a thought experiment. I tend to dip into theory when in doubt. This is kind of like a mental exercise that I did to try and prove to myself and to others that there could be a solution to this problem, which we called the donut. The idea was that you start on the outside and try and work towards the treasure buildings in the middle. And you had the search zones that you were searching for the location to the treasure, and then the treasure buildings were always in the middle, and then you could move your way out, and it didn't matter where you started. You could have 3 of these search zones, or 6, or 4, or whatever, and it would always be roughly equidistant. But there were some problems with this, namely that, why do you have 3 treasure buildings in the middle if they're all bunched up together? What kind of experience does that have? Why don't you just have one? Also, do we have to make every single map look like that? Because if we have to make every single map like that, if we've got no other variations than that, why are we shipping other maps? So just evolving that a little bit brought up some other ideas, and what we realized was that what matters most of all is the flow of how players potentially start and work their way towards the treasure and get out again, and making sure that flow is balanced. So in further iterations on maps, as we went towards production and started brainstorming the other 5 maps, you can see that these are a lot more regular right from the off, a lot more balanced. So we learned from that problem quite early on. And this is Graveyard, which was the second map that we put into production. And you can see how that was fairly directly influenced from that original seed of an idea. And you can see, when I meant the flow through the level, you see how you move through that, excuse me, through the flow of the level. And in that's how you move through Graveyard. But we also did add another extraction point as well. We realized that we couldn't use those side ones as extraction points. This is Marshland, and again, like Marshland started off very much inspired by that original seed of an idea, but then it deviated, and that was because we realized that we didn't actually need it to be a donut. Like I said, we needed it to be symmetrical, and we were learning more about what we needed. So shouldn't stick too close to the theory. Like when it served its purpose, you can move on. And from that prototype, you can see it pretty close to what we shipped on Marshland. And even though Marshland looks quite organic, it is very well balanced. The distances between these spawn points and these extraction points and the key buildings is very well measured. But we also wanted to kind of like reflect this organic quality that was part of our lore at that point. So we started with the Outlaws that you play they represent nature, they represent chaos and an organic kind of side of things versus the state, which is, you know, brutalism, fascism, order imposed on this world. So we did try and maintain this kind of like asymmetry and, you know, sort of a visual conflict between those two states as much as we could. Right.
Got some guard action going on.
So this is the Graveyard map, and this is about 10 months on, I believe. So as you can see, we've got new characters, we've got a new movement model, and this map is much smaller than the previous proto map, but it feels bigger because of these new movement sets that we introduced. The sprint speed is slower. The camera is lower, the field of view has changed, everything feels bigger, chunkier, and larger, even though it's quite considerably, even though the map is quite considerably smaller than the last one. Some cool ingredients like shimmying up a rope. And the buildings have interiors. All the key buildings have interiors, so you could explore them and find the treasure. And you see, at this state, it's a bit of a maze. That was by design at the time. We kind of wanted to make players have exploration inside the buildings, but it was too much. It was too complicated, and it became one of those big sticking points that I mentioned that dominated playtest feedback.
Where they are. They might be upstairs.
Right, which way we're going to head? We're going to head to the docks.
So,
someone up top
yeah, in this case, Andy Willens is playing, and he needs me to escort him because otherwise he has absolutely no clue about where to go. You can see everywhere you look, it looks the same. There's it's not helped by the grid mesh, but it's we tried quite a lot of things, including color coding and signposting and hospital lines, and none of that really worked because actually the problem is structural. It's structural level design that really defines everything else. Yeah. There's another tactical error by me, one of many in this game. So, confusing interiors. We settled very quickly on the three key buildings, the keep, the church, and the garrison as locations where the treasure would be. We wanted them to have very clean, clear silhouettes, so that if you said, I found the location of the treasure, it's in the church, you could identify that from its silhouette and go there. And that worked really well. We'd also reuse these maps on these buildings on different maps, so that players would be able to, learn the interiors a little bit better and memorize their way around. But as I said before, it was quite confusing. So this initial blockout or early blockout that I built was just a direct copy of that original mesh. And as you can see, it was like very square and just built around corridors, had different floors, so we could put treasure buildings on different floors. And the problem is that it looked like that pretty much everywhere, and players had real trouble working out what floor they were on, what direction they were facing, where they were going. I mean, it's really, again, this is real LD101 stuff, the navigation issues. So a redraft or a redesign of the keep building was to try and flip that, remove all the corridors as much as possible, replace it with rooms. And we weren't sure at that point how much space you needed to still have a stealth experience. So the size of the rooms, we were just trying to explore, you know, would something like this be okay? Maybe this is too big. Maybe it would, you know, maybe you couldn't hide effectively in a space that big. But we're trying to make these rooms a little bit more interesting, a little bit more memorable and noticeable. So if you're in the bedroom, you can see that there was a bed there, even in block-out form. And that would give you a sense of place, at least. And that aspect worked, but players still found it really confusing. They didn't know where to go, what floor they needed to be on. And these spiral staircases turned players around. So that it was really confusing. And I was practicing this talk the other day in front of my wife, and she studied medieval history. And she told me, yeah, obviously, castles are designed to be the most irritating, disorientating buildings by design to stop players from infiltrating them and stealing the chest. So obviously, you know, you can't make it like a real treasure building, that was great information in 2022, a year after we shipped. So again, me dipping into some theory, just trying to sort this out in my head. This is a network map of the keep, the redesigned keep that you just saw. And each room is like one of those nodes, and the lines between them are the different routes, the different doorways and access corridors that you could get to those rooms through. And what stood out was there's like all these little rooms that you kind of like ante-rooms that you had to kind of pass through to get to the main rooms. And it seemed that, and there were a lot of redundant corridors and things, and it just seemed a little bit complicated. So by stripping some of these things out, it became a little bit simpler, and some moving like locations of the treasure rooms around, and just shuffling some things around on paper to see how it panned out. The upshot of that was that the rooms became consolidated into much larger rooms. And again, that, you know, is that still a problem with stealth? Turns out no. You can hide behind like little barrels, at least with the gameplay as it was at the time. It was much improved, and you could hide behind pillars and barrels, and didn't need to hide behind, you know, hide in corridors and in enclosed spaces. And yeah, so this is how it ended up. So like very large key rooms, clutter, but you know, tight, solid cover that you could hide behind, and visual identifiers. You've got like a statue in the middle there, and very clear identification about which room you could be in. And you saw the church previously. So this is the church. The thing about churches is churches are the opposite of castles. They're big, you know, the nave above ground part of the church is a big open space with lots of pillars and benches that you can hide behind. And so, you know, it's fine. But what you saw previously were the catacombs and the crypt, which were confusing. So again, did the network map. And also my wife said, you know, catacombs also designed to trap you and like get you lost. So yeah, fair enough. The garrison was slightly different because we needed a different silhouette, and everyone knows what a keep is, and everyone knows what a church is. But you know, what's a third medieval building? Like no one could really name one. So this is the garrison. So we started with the silhouette. We like the idea of a tower, and here are some concepts that we did. And we like this one in the middle with sort of the Game of Thrones Black Watch kind of aesthetic that we really thought was really cool. And that's, you know, it does look really cool, but it has sort of an L-shaped footprint, and it has lots of towers and ante-rooms and a gantry on the outside, and it's kind of the opposite of what we needed, really, that simplified version. Doing a network map, it looked like that, which is an absolute state. And like when I did it, I was just like, yeah, this is identifies the problem. But work had already, there's been quite a lot of work done on the outside of the building by that stage. A lot of the maps relied on the footprint of the garrison, so how to improve it. Let's just consolidate, replace doorways, bring the rooms, make the rooms bigger, try and maximize the use of a floor plan as much as possible until we got to something like that. And the thing is, like I said, this was one of the topics that dominated playtests. By the time we got to that, the problems were not dominating the playtest. So I knew it had worked, at least to some extent. Sorted. Here we go. So this is Outpost. If you've played the game, it's quite recognisable as Outpost. That's Hood's dash. If you saw Jamie's talk yesterday, he talked about Hood having a dash as a superpower before he had an exploding arrow. That was the dash. And like a lot of like this, like I say, it's very recognisable as Outpost. It has the garrison building in the middle and outer walls surrounding it. It was a really strong idea and one of the best maps. Well, a lot of people's favourites. And but the interiors of the garrison were quite tight and windy, and as you can see, this was before the redesign, and there was like a little section of bridge that takes you out of the building and into another building. And it was all too complicated, and it was just confusing people. There's another tactical error. This was another problem, like aiming down off battlements. You can see the problems that I was having trying to tag and shoot people who were like clearly below. It's a bit of a power position as well. We ended up, you know, a lot of work was done trying to measure these precisely, make sure there's a gap between. I left that in. And we also sloped them down, so you had a better like shot down, but also more of a chance for players on the ground to shoot up as well.
Oh, there's someone over there.
Oh, no.
Yeah. That's really satisfying. I think that was Stu. I'm pretty sure that was Stu. This is a power position that we had to remove. This game went on for 40 minutes because there's just this clean line of sight down on the extraction point, and you know, with the aiming mechanics as they were at the time, you could just kill whoever was down there, no problem, and cover them quite well until someone came up behind you, stabbed you, and then like took over, and then the game went backwards and forwards. Fortunately, you know, it became quite obvious in playtest very quickly. Where it was less obvious, we used like recordings from playtest footage. We recorded a lot, and heat maps as well. So I just want to talk about the final big problem that we had throughout production, and it's the big map problem, or the Citadel problem, as I called it. So if you remember this early prototype, based off, just roughly based off an existing castle, it served its purpose, but in order to keep the map playable, we found that certain things had to be added, certain things had to be removed as the game evolved. But actually, as more things were added to the map, the cost of maintaining it was large, and the cost of iterating was very difficult. So even in this case, we've got 3 key buildings, prison being the proto-garrison, but that moved closer to the center of the map to make it balanced. But it also, every time you move something, it leads to some other problems, and sometimes you just can't iterate on a daily basis and keep the map playable. So we were kind of constrained by that. But we also liked the map, and we didn't really know of a better map as we moved into production, or didn't really have a better idea at that point about how we moved to production. But we had a list of problems with it, and we had a little bit of breathing time to change it. So we took it and we just tried to fix the problems and make it better. This actually has a much smaller footprint than this one because we'd already started to slow down the player a little bit. And you can see the size of the church versus the size of the chapel there. So it is quite a bit smaller than that previous map. But like I say, because we'd slowed down the player, we were starting to change the 3 Cs and the the camera position and field of view, it didn't feel like you were invading a fort on a hill. It felt like you were invading a citadel. So we called it Citadel. And as cover mechanics became more important into the gameplay, we added more cover mechanics, and that meant more ingredients per square meter that we had. So it suddenly became very, very dense. And with that became a maintenance problem of making sure that it was always playable. So even though it could, it did play very well, it was also enormous and started just being a pain in the ass, really. So at some point we decided to put it on ice. We started work on Graveyard, that small map with the one key building, and that became our testbed level. It was in a much better state to maintain the main game, and we did all gameplay related playtests in that. And we actually put the entire level on ice. We did work on other levels as well while we were doing that. But in time, we still needed to ship the 6 maps. And this was one of them, and it was kind of half complete. So the question became, like, could we resurrect it? Could we ship this map? And the art team said no, they couldn't. It was really too big. And from a gameplay purpose, it was also too big. We'd learned enough about the gameplay by that point that we knew it was too big. So how big did it need to be? Probably about half. So then the question came, like, should we ship this map or half of this map, or should we start a new one that we haven't got any clue about, that we haven't prototyped? But in the end, we decided, there's enough that's good in this map, we can make it work, and stripped it down to its bare essentials. Removed a lot of the clutter, rearranged the key buildings a little bit, and rearranged the spaces, and applied all the best practices. This is a do-over, essentially, but it was working from the existing template. But we were applying all the best practices of what we'd learned in the past few months. And of course, like, the symmetry aspect was one of the big things. Like, my big concern when stripping down the map to half is, like, do we still have symmetry? But of course, being able to work on it again at that level meant being able to make it absolutely precise. And I measured all of those distances between all the different ingredients very, very precisely. And then again, with art team doing some heavy lifting again, we ended up with something that looked really awesome and quite iconic. So I am glad, even though perhaps it may have been a mistake, I probably wouldn't do that again. I am glad that we ended up shipping this map as we did. So yeah, that's just about it from me. We were a small studio, I think, and we've grown since. And Hood itself, we've had lots of postmortems about what worked and what didn't. I think one of the most important things is that we were able to identify problems very quickly and respond to those problems very quickly. But like all the things that I mentioned, as LDs, you're looking at it, it's like, oh yeah, unbalanced map, complicated interiors, maps, they're unnecessarily big. These things are fundamental to LD, but they're also fundamental because they keep coming back. There are always problems that are recurring over and over again, and it is important to know how to identify them and how to solve them. So I hope that's something that you can take away today. But ultimately, I'm really pleased, really proud of what we delivered on Hood. It's an awesome game, and the levels are excellent. There's no bad levels at all. When looking at player feedback, there's no one level that everyone hates. Everyone has their own favourites. And that means we've done a good job with enough variety that everyone can have a favourite between the levels. And I think, because the player feedback is ultimately very positive, I think that's the best measure of whether we've done a good job. So I'm very happy with what we've done. Thanks very much. Oh.
You mentioned you also did external playtests with players. How did it? How often did you do them, and how did they correlate with the insight that you got with the internal playtests?
That's a very good question. I think the general feeling is that we didn't do it enough and we didn't do it early enough. I think we relied on internal playtests a little bit too much. We did play with the publisher often, in fact, very early. The early demos helped sell the game to the publishers. It was that kind of state that they played in, and they played with us in weekly playtests quite a lot. But it isn't a replacement for that, that couch playtest moment. We could communicate very well. We had TeamSpeak set up. We all had the same servers, and everything was fine for us. But maybe we were ignoring bugs. Maybe we were ignoring gameplay issues or exploiting them in different ways that we shouldn't expect players to do. So yes, we did do some external playtests, but I think we probably should have done that a little bit earlier. And spread it out a little bit more often.
Yeah, I was wondering, how would you? There's not enough assets or something, versus this is a core problem in the game.
It's a very difficult one. It's a really difficult one, and I think that is a problem that you have to judge all the way through. One of the thing is that assets actually change everything. There's no when you have an art pass or you have an art treatment, it changes the perception of a level completely. So what worked before may suddenly not work just because of the way it looks, or vice versa. It might solve problems that you had on a level design side. Finding that balance is very difficult. Also, there is also a perception problem internally as well about gauging the level of assets, because if you use real assets, it looks kind of done. It just looks like crappy art and not prototype. So almost you have to use so for example, the grid box mesh that we used for the interiors, we didn't want to use brick because it would look too polished, but the grid box is really confusing, and it gave the wrong impression as well. So you do have to kind of make that judgment throughout production. Yeah. Does that answer your question? I don't think it does.
It's a hard question. I think especially with a stealth game, because a lot of that's about looking at stuff and trying to identify hiding shadows or whatever.
Yeah. So early on, we did have the idea about hiding in shadows, light and shadow, which were in a sort of a thief style. We just couldn't get it working. Like you said, we didn't have the technology. We couldn't really get it working reliably enough to make it a success. So we ended up not relying on it. But things like the bushes that you can hide in hiding were very. We were able to get them working very quickly. So and we found that for the bushes, you did need, as soon as you put in a little bit of movement and a little bit of something that looked like a leaf, it would actually hide a player extremely well. A static mesh didn't really hide anything well, but as soon as you start putting just a little bit of movement, then players could actually roam inside bushes, and they could be very effective spacers. And then obviously you did need, the ability for AI not to see you in bushes as well, because otherwise that just completely breaks everything. I think it is important to get everything, functionally complete. It is important to be functionally complete and work out what is part of that functionality. It is the art part of that functionality. You need to make that judgment.
Hi, thank you for the great talk. So you mentioned it was a fairly small team with about 4 level designers and about 6 maps. So I was a bit curious about the distribution of LDs per map, because it seems like these maps need quite a strong vision throughout. So was it one level designer owning one level for months on end or a full year even? Or how was it distributed, and what do you think were the pros and cons of that process, and would you do it the same way for this type of game again, or would you possibly switch it up a bit next time?
So you might disagree with me. I think it worked all right. So basically, so Citadel is the only map of the 6 that it's the one that I worked in the most, right? The early I was the first LD on the team, and then Emily and Mel and Lucy joined progressively throughout the development. But 5 of the maps are theirs, and Citadel's the only one that's I really spent a lot of time in. That said, we all spent some degree of time in each other's map, and sometimes the ownership of that map. We did assign ownership, but sometimes the ownership of that map changed, but we needed to make sure that there was sort of a second owner to some extent. Make sure that there's always someone on hand in case the owner was on holiday or whatever. So I think ownership kind of shifted, but I think everyone has a map that they feel is theirs. Yeah, sort of, yeah. I mean, there's definitely definitely maps, and I say, well, that's Emily's map, and stuff like that. So yeah, on the buildings, again, we all had a crack at the buildings, but I think I spent the most time on the building interiors. But yeah, so yes, we did have ownership. Ownership shifted in general, and yeah, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's finding that balance between making sure that it's something you worked on that you're proud of, but also, making sure, bus crash test, what happens if you're in a bus crash, what happens to it, and also buddying up and making sure that you have experience in the other maps and you know what's going on with it and stuff like that.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks for the talk. I'm wondering, by then, do you have a technical designer or technical level designer role on the team?
Yeah, me. I guess.
Yes. Okay. So, what's the main responsibility? Does this role lead in some way?
So I was actively avoiding leading. So our team was quite small. So there was 8 designers and Andy Willens as the lead. And that's but we tried to maintain a flat structure, which I think you can do when you've got a team of that size. As it got a little bit further, if there were more people on the team, we would need more of a hierarchy. But yeah, I don't know. I did some of the lead stuff, but I think Emily also did some of the lead stuff as also a senior on the project. But yeah, in general, it was, Andy, designers. And the studio was small enough, and we were just at this point where we could make that work, I think, without a hierarchy. On my side, on the technical side of things, yeah, I was probably the most technical of the designers, so I was building tools and stuff. We also had tech art, of course, and other stuff. Most of the gameplay and ingredients, it was done by code. So.
You mentioned with the in-house testing that the own designers didn't play a lot like the actual game players. Was there anything you felt to encourage them, like forcing playset? There was no team speak, or spawn camp me.
Yeah. Oh well, I mean, like I say, even without names, we could tell. Yeah, we did identify team communication is really vital for that game. We did identify that it was a problem that if you didn't have team speak, it was really hard to communicate your intentions to the rest of the team. So yeah, we did have play sessions where we didn't have team speak in order to make that work. Sometimes there were things like build notes. It's just don't go up there. It's just you're gonna have a bad time. But then there's no way of stopping that from happening really. We did do targeted playtests, but I would say most of the targeted playtests were kind of in a gym or something like that. But we did have targeted playtests for sure. Yeah, I don't think that completely eliminates. It certainly doesn't eliminate the experience problem. Fresh eyes and making sure you got fresh eyes and stuff. I think that's why the open days around Sumo are really good, where you know, having demos of other games that people are working on, even other developers are working on, but coming to it with fresh eyes is the important thing.
Yeah, so you said about your like very first kind of sort of prototype, you had the Paragon character and the sort of castle. Like, what was that? Literally it for the like very first sort of finding the fun? What was the kind of bare minimum that you needed for your game to start like prototyping?
I don't think it was very much beyond that initially. Like, so it was built on. We did start producing some, you know, some minor ingredients to get places and things. But from the very early playtest, like, was literally that model in a with almost completely stock Unreal, with that Paragon character kind of like sandwiched in, and just, you know, I don't think you could even die. You know, like, with being hit by the fireball, she could fire fireballs, but you couldn't die. You couldn't take damage. But obviously, we realized, you know, that wasn't you know, viable, you know, to test it fully. So progressively, more things got added, more gameplay ingredients. You know, obviously, we needed a chest, and we needed to be able to pick up the chest, or at least like make the chest disappear. You know, stuff like that. I think we had a vault door quite early on, like a locked door, and you needed to kind of like interact with it to open it up. So things were added progressively in that early prototype, for sure. But it started really rough. Yeah, you know.
Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, that's one. Hi. So, yeah. First of all, I think the art. I'm a junior environment artist, so I think it's like amazing what was accomplished with such a small team. And I think the thing that stood out for me mostly when looking at it was just like the fantastical scale of like some of the buildings and the impact that they make. Like, it is jaw-dropping in some instances. So was that like an early decision that you wanted people to enter these levels and be like, wow, like that is like massive and it's very impactful, or was that something that came naturally later down the line?
So the scale in what we shipped is much more magnified than that early castle model, which is vaguely realistic. You know, like these things are like, you know, 50 meters high. You know, some of these towers, or quite a bit higher. So yeah, so it did evolve over time. But I mean, I think we were all sold on the kind of the impact that it had. And especially as the concept work and the art tests came in, it was like, yeah, actually, this is really cool. From a gameplay point of view, it was dreadful. So, like, we had all sorts of problems. Like, one of them was like, you know, those ropes, they're quite slow. Ladders are quite slow. How do you get 50 meters high on a rope or a ladder? It's not, you know, it's not great. Stairwells, you're like constantly going up stairwells, doubling back, which is disorientating. And going back, those spiral staircases obviously were really bad. And in general, the terrain was very organic, so it was like, you know, we had to dial it back. The tools team developed a tool that could show us how steep a slope was that the combat system could, you know, deal with, because otherwise they were like, you know, if you were lower down, you were always chopping at someone's ankles, and if you're higher up, you're always swinging your sword above the head. So it did lead to problems, but I think we were all sold on the fantasy of and it was finding that compromise from a gameplay level design point of view with the, you know, the desirability from the art point of view.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, you mentioned having to adjust things like the battlement heights and sort of the density and position of sort of clutter and cover in some of the larger rooms. And I was wondering if you ever ran into issues where the sort of ideal placement and positioning and size of those objects would affect the sort of sense of place, and you end up with that kind of theme park effect, where everything sort of looks right, but it doesn't feel at all kind of real, and how do you sort of address that, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it is weird. Things like doors, for example, like in the third-person perspective, are just weird. Like they're enormous. You measure them properly, they just don't make any sense whatsoever. So yeah, it is a problem. I think you have to absorb some of that, especially in a third-person kind of view, and the player accepts it to some extent. I mean, there's some ridiculous kind of things, but I remember a lot of time was spent, measuring doors, and just like, this is ridiculous. Well, it's crazy, but actually it doesn't look too bad when you're actually playing it, and no one really notices it. We had one height for cover essentially, or like a very small, like the animation was really good, but there were very small tolerances on what it could accept. So things like tables had to be between like a meter or 0.9 meters and 1.1. It was like a very small margin for error, and so there were huge problems with that and knock-on effects. And I like the main way that we combated that, I think, was putting clutter on top. And removing the collision on that clutter, so you could climb on. There's stuff on the table, but you could climb on it, and your feet could run through it, and it didn't really matter. And that kind of broke it up a little bit. Cool. I think I've got 2 minutes.
So when you did the theoretical maps, do you wish you'd have done them like earlier in sort of the design process, or do you think when you did them was sort of the only point you could do them because of sort of the experience you had with making the levels up to that point?
Yeah, possibly could have done them earlier. They were the intention was to fix a specific problem that we'd discovered, right? So it was very much problem solving, reactionary, and not as a theoretical concept, like at the start of the game, a theoretical direction. That's not to say we didn't have any design documentation, because we did. We did do planning, of course. It wasn't completely chaotic. But yeah, that was kind of like those things that, like the network map and the donut, were kind of reactions to specific problems that we were like, how can we make this work? I don't know how we can make this work, so let's try and hash it out on paper and try and work out what the solution is.
Thanks.
Good. Lunchtime?
Did you ever try out first person?
No.
It's all like third person, like you see on the side.
It was always planned to be third person, and I don't believe we ever did a first person at all. I don't think we even did like an aiming camera or anything like that. It was first person, so all third. Okay. Cool. Thank you very much.